Okay, so we interact with rubber products every single day, probably without even realizing how often. Tires, phone cases, shoes. But have you ever, actually thought about the people who take something as basic as rubber and turn it into all that?
You're talking about rubber technologists, right? It's kind of like they're wizards with polymers and stuff.
Yeah, exactly. And we're not even just talking tires here.
No, no, not at all. Think about medical devices, aerospace engineering, all sorts of industries you wouldn't expect rely on their expertise. They're really pushing the limits of what rubber can do.
It's true. It's pretty wild when you start to consider it. So let's dive into some of these resources we have. This RoleCatcher career guide, it has a whole section about what they do.
Okay, yeah, I've got that pulled up too.
It says they develop compound formulations that respond to specific needs, which, to be honest, sounds a bit like jargon to me.
Yeah.
What does that actually mean in practice?
Right. Well, it's all about understanding the nuances of rubber. Think about it. A rubber band needs to be super stretchy, but a tire needs to be tough, durable.
Night and day.
Exactly. So rubber technologists, they're like chefs in a way. They need to know their ingredients, the different types of rubber, the additives, how it all comes together at a molecular level.
So it's not just knowing about rubber, it's knowing how to transform it for all these different uses.
Hmm.
And this guide even mentions how technology advances are changing things, like nanotechnology.
Yeah.
Nanotechnology in rubber, that's kind of blowing my mind right now.
Oh, yeah, it's seriously cutting edge. Imagine tires that could repair themselves after a puncture or artificial skin that feels real because of nanotech in the rubber.
Wow. Okay, so self-healing tires, that's the future right there. But I guess like any job, there's got to be downsides too. This guide mentions there's high demand for rubber products, which is good, but also potential exposure to some iffy materials.
Yeah, you got that right. It's a trade-off, like anything else. On one hand, job security is great, but you do have to be aware of the risks involved. And to mitigate those risks, you need certain skills. The guide really stressed science and complex problem solving. I think they were at 71% and 59% in that functions and core abilities section.
So not just anyone can walk in and handle these materials clearly. You need the knowledge, the problem-solving chops. Makes me wonder, how does someone even get started in a field like this? The getting started part of this role catcher guide, maybe that has some answers. Let's see, it says here. Okay, yeah. So obviously a degree in chemical engineering or something similar is pretty much a must-have. But what I found interesting was the emphasis on getting practical experience ASAP. Like internships are super important.
Yeah, that makes sense. Getting your hands dirty, seeing how it all works in the real world.
Exactly. And get this, they even say you need a portfolio. A portfolio for rubber technology.
I did not see that coming. What would that even look like? Right. But it's becoming more and more common. It's a way to prove you've got the skills. It's one thing to say you can develop these innovative rubber compounds, but showing actual results, projects you've worked on, that's what makes you stand out.
So it's about showcasing those compound formulations they were talking about earlier. Very cool. But even with a killer portfolio, getting noticed these days is tough. It's like that whole section in the guide, Beat the Automated Recruiter. Algorithms are basically screening people out before a human even sees their application.
Oh, tell me about it. It's like you're up against robots sometime.
Right. So how do you even get past those gatekeepers?
Well, that's where RoleCatcher's platform seems really useful, actually. They've got tools that analyze job descriptions, figure out those keywords that matter most, helps you tailor your resume, increase your chances of actually getting in front of a human being.
Okay, so it's like a secret weapon for the digital age. But it sounds like RoleCatcher does more than just resumes. It's almost like they're invested in your career long term, not just getting you a job, period.
Yeah, that's what struck me too. They have this career stages section that walks you through the typical path, from entry level all the way up to senior roles. They even give you advice for each stage.
Huh, like having a career coach in your pocket. That's pretty neat, actually. But speaking of nerve-wracking career stuff, let's talk about interviews. That interview prep section in this guide, I feel like that could be really valuable for our listeners.
Oh, for sure. They give you real questions they ask, like, describe your experience in rubber compounding and formulation. It's like getting a sneak peek behind the curtain.
No kidding. Knowing what they're going to ask ahead of time, that's a huge advantage. But I guess even if you know the answers, actually saying them out loud in an interview, that's a whole other thing.
Totally. And RoleCatcher gets that. They have this tool where you can record yourself answering these questions, and then, get this, AI gives you feedback on how you're doing.
Well, hold on. AI is analyzing your interview skills. That's wild.
Right. having a personal coach break down your every word, your tone, everything.
Okay, that's seriously impressive. They're not just telling you what to say, they're helping you say it with confidence.
Hmm.
I like it. But, this whole conversation has got me curious about what it actually looks like to work as a rubber technologist. Like day to day, what are you actually doing? Especially when you're first starting out. So we're back, and I gotta say, this whole rubber technologist thing, way more high-tech than I imagined. But what's it actually like on a daily basis? Like if you're fresh out of school, what are you doing?
Well, this RoleCatcher guide, it has a section about the different career stages. And honestly, the description for entry-level rubber technologists surprised me. It's not all like fetching coffee and making copies.
Oh, really? They throw you right into it.
Yeah, they're talking about developing those compound formulations we were discussing, running tests, even collaborating with senior technologists on real projects from day one.
Wow, so you're getting your hands dirty right away. That makes sense, I guess, with all the emphasis on practical experience. And the guide gave this example of a typical entry-level person. Enthusiastic, detail-oriented, already comfortable with testing and analysis. They even mentioned holding a specific certification.
Right. That's what I noticed too. Like even early on, they're expected to be pretty on top of things. It's not just showing up. You got to have some chops already.
Shows you how serious this field is, huh? And speaking of leveling up that elevating your career section,
Hmm.
it basically said you can't just coast once you get a job. Rubber technology, you got to keep learning.
Yeah.
What they say about how careers in this actually progress.
There's actually a lot of paths you can take, which is cool. You could go into management, leading teams, that kind of thing. Or specialize in a specific industry. Like you could be the rubber guru for, I don't know, the automotive industry or the medical field.
So you could really niche down, become the expert in rubber for a very specific thing.
Exactly. Or if you're really into pushing the limits, you could go into research and development. That's where all those crazy new technologies come from.
True, true. But with all the nanotech and whatnot, keeping up with the latest must be a job in itself.
Oh, absolutely. The industry is always evolving. The guide really stressed that you got to be a lifelong learner. Go for those advanced degrees, go to conferences, maybe even publish research if that's your thing.
It's almost like being a student forever, but in a good way, right? Always learning new stuff. Okay, but let's get back to something a bit more practical, or maybe terrifying, depending on how you see it. Interviews. Anything else in that interview prep section that stood out?
Oh, yeah. I loved how RoleCatcher actually gave those real-world question examples. Like, one was, how do you ensure the quality of rubber products during the manufacturing process? Gets right to the heart of it, you know?
No fluff. Just
Yep.
straight to what matters. You
Yeah.
got to know your stuff. And not just the theory, right? It's understanding how all that science plays out when you're actually making something in a factory.
Totally. Shows you need to understand the entire life cycle of a rubber product and how to troubleshoot when things go wrong. Because they always do, right?
Right? Something's always going to go sideways. And those problem-solving skills got to be on point, especially with all these new technologies popping up all the time. Which reminds me, they had another question, something like, how do you stay up to date with new developments in rubber technology?
Oh, that's a big one. You can't just say, oh, I read a blog post once. They want to know you're actively seeking out new info, figuring out how to use it in your work. Got to show that passion.
It makes you sound way more impressive too, right? I'm not just keeping up, I'm ahead of the curve. But okay, even if you nail all the technical stuff, are there like people skills that are important here? Being a rubber technologist, you're not just dealing with chemicals all day, right?
Totally not. Remember, that RoleCatcher guide, it talked a lot about collaboration and communication in that functions and core ability section. Those are just as crucial as your scientific know-how.
Oh, right, because you're going to be working on teams with engineers and designers and all sorts of people.
Exactly. Got to be able to get your ideas across clearly, work effectively with others. It's not a solo mission to get that innovative rubber product out there.
Right, like teamwork makes the dream work or something like that. So
Yeah.
it's not enough to just be brilliant in a lab. Got to be able to play nice with others.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've covered what you do day to day, how careers progress, even some tough interview questions. But there's one more thing that's been on my mind this whole time.
Oh, I'm intrigued. What's got you thinking?
It's RoleCatcher itself,
Mm.
honestly. They seem to be doing so much more than just connecting job seekers with, a job posting. It's
Yeah.
like they're giving you the tools to succeed throughout your whole career, not just at the very beginning.
100%. I was thinking the same thing. It's like having a personal career coach, but available anytime, day or night. Whether you're just starting out, switching careers, or gunning for that promotion, they've got something for everyone.
And they're not just talking about it, they're actually using technology to make it happen, which I think is really cool, making career advancement more accessible no matter your background.
Totally. It's like they're leveling the playing field. You don't need to know the right people or come from a certain school. It's about passion and hard work.
That's really inspiring, honestly, a company that actually walks the walk. Okay, so we've covered a ton of ground here. I feel like I have a much better understanding of what it takes to not just work as a rubber technologist, but to really kill it.
We've only just scratched the surface. But yeah, it's been a fascinating deep dive into this field.
It has. But before we wrap up this episode, gotta ask, for you, what's the biggest takeaway? What makes the work of a rubber technologist so important in the grand scheme of things? So we're back, and it's time to wrap up our deep dive into the world of rubber technology. We've covered so much, from the science of rubber to the skills needed to really excel in this field. But if you had to boil it all down, what's the most important thing for our listeners to remember? What does it really take to not just be a rubber technologist, but to be a truly great one?
You know, it's funny. It's not just about knowing everything about polymers and vulcanization, although that's obviously important. It's more about like a mindset, a way of approaching problems, always looking for something new. Remember all that stuff about technology advances in that RoleCatcher guide? That constant change, that's key.
So you're saying a rubber technologist can't be afraid to push the limits a little bit, to experiment, try new technologies.
Exactly. Think about nanotechnology and what it's doing to the field. I mean, we're talking about rubber stronger than steel, electronics that bend, even artificial organs that feel real. It's about seeing those possibilities and going for it.
Not just working with rubber, it's like shaping the future with it. And it's not a one-person job either, right?
Meh.
We talked about how collaboration is so important in this field.
100%. The best rubber technologists, they're not stuck in a lab all by themselves. They can explain their ideas to engineers, designers, the people actually making this stuff. It takes everyone working together to make those innovations a reality.
So you got to be a good communicator, good at working with a team, on top of all the science stuff. It's a lot.
It is. But that's what makes this career path so interesting, right? There's always something new to learn, new people to connect with, and honestly, that's something I really appreciate about RoleCatcher. Throughout this whole deep dive, they've really impressed me. It's not just about getting you a job, it's about giving you the tools to have an amazing career.
Yeah, it's like they're saying, we're not just going to get you in the door, we're going to help you build the whole dang house.
Exactly. And the way they're using technology to do it, it's really smart. It feels personal, but also super powerful at the same time.
It's been eye-opening to see how they're making career development accessible to everyone, regardless of background.
It's all about giving people the power to shape their own careers. And when people feel empowered, that's when industries change for better.
That's such a good point. So as we close out this episode on rubber technology, I want to leave our listeners with this. The next time you use something made of rubber, whether it's a simple rubber band or a piece of life-saving medical equipment, think about the rubber technologists behind it. They're the ones making our world a better, more innovative place, often in ways we don't even see.
And hey, maybe this deep dive has inspired someone listening. Maybe someday they'll be the ones pushing the boundaries of what's possible with rubber.
That's a wrap on this episode of The Deep Dive. We hope you enjoyed exploring this fascinating field with us. Until next time, keep learning, keep exploring, and keep diving deep into the worlds you never knew you needed to know about.